$8,888,684. That's how much the United States' highest paid government employee earns. Can you guess who this might be? Most people's first guess is usually government leaders, maybe the president. Well, the US president actually only earns $400,000 per year. Maybe Supreme Court justices? Well, these guys only earn just over $200,000 on average. Okay, what about Jerome Powell? He literally prints the money, so he should earn a lot, right? Well, even Jerome Powell only earns just over $200,000 per year. Now, don't get me wrong here, these aren't terrible salaries by any means. But when you consider how much work it takes to get to these positions, it doesn't seem all that lucrative. If you're a Supreme Court justice, for example, you're literally 1 in 9, but you don't even earn as much as a junior software engineer at Facebook. But wait a minute, who's the government employee who's earning $8.8 million then? Well, it's not leaders or chairmen or even politicians. It's actually the football coach at the University of Alabama, Nick Saban. In fact, it's not just Nick who tops the government salaries list either. The top 10 government salaries all go to football coaches at various public universities. While this may be surprising at first glance, when you consider how much revenue a good football coach can bring in, their compensations start to make sense. But this doesn't explain why regular government salaries are so garbage. For example, Jerome Powell is literally responsible for printing trillions of dollars and inciting macroeconomic changes. So you would think that this job would be highly compensated to attract the absolute best talent. Yet, it's not. You don't even have to look that high up in the ladder to realize how underpaid government employees are. Police officers, for example, risk their lives to keep all of us safe, yet they're paid $70,000. Similarly, teachers are responsible for educating the next generation, yet they're paid $55,000. By far the worst one, however, is EMTs, who are directly responsible for saving millions of lives, yet they're only paid $36,000. So how did government salaries get so bad? One of the first explanations that pop up is that government organizations are underfunded, and that this is why government employees are underpaid. But you don't have to do much analysis to recognize that this is completely false. Federal government spending currently clocks in at just under $6 trillion. And the US currently has a total of 1.87 million federal employees. This means that the revenue per employee clocks in at a whopping $3.2 million per employee. For perspective, Apple stands at 1.9 million, Facebook stands at 1.6 million, and Alphabet stands at 1.3 million. And these companies are known as the highest paying employers in the entire world. Apple's salary numbers are skewed due to their retail employees, but Facebook and Google come in with median salaries of just under $300,000. Conversely, the federal government pulls in twice as much revenue per employee as these companies. Yet the average salary is only $79,000. People often criticize private companies for not paying their employees enough money, but the average business actually pays out between 15 and 30% of their revenue as salaries. The federal government, on the other hand, pays out less than 2.5% of their revenue as salaries. Yeah, it's that bad. If the government matched the average business and paid out 15 to 30%, we would see average salaries between $480,000 and $960,000. Even if they only paid out 10%, we would see an average salary of $320,000, easily blowing out the private industry. But if that's the case, where's all the money going? Well, the answer is that it's getting stuck up across inefficient government structures. In many aspects, the government operates as more of a charity than a logical business. Take NASA, for example. You may have heard about their new SLS rocket. While it's definitely an impressive rocket, it's grossly expensive, coming in at $4.1 billion per launch, and it's not even reusable. One of the main reasons for this is that NASA is leveraging space shuttle technology from the 1970s instead of the latest and greatest. Why, you ask? Well, it's to protect all of the industries and jobs that were dependent on the space shuttle program. While this is indeed a nice sentiment, it's not really all that practical. And this is precisely why private companies have been putting NASA to shame. The SpaceX Falcon 9, for example, only cost $67 million per launch, while the Falcon Heavy only costs $97 million per launch. Also, that's how much SpaceX is charging customers, so their internal costs are likely even lower. And in terms of payload, the Falcon Heavy has a LEO payload capacity of 64 metric tons, while SLS has a LEO payload capacity of 70 metric tons. So SLS basically has 10% extra payload capacity for 42 times the cost. As you can see, the government doesn't have a funding issue. What they have is an ineffective spending issue. We can't just lay all the blame on the government though, as much of the low salaries are due to the employees themselves and what they're willing to put up with. And it's no secret that government jobs are relatively chill. And while you can argue all you want about how great a given company's culture is, it's simply not comparable to the government. It's truly a 9 to 5, and while the government does have its own fair share of stressful jobs, the vast majority are not. For example, think about a tax examiner at the IRS or a clerk at the DMV. This laid-back nature is one of the biggest selling factors of the public industry, not to mention the job security. But this also means that everyone who ends up joining the public industry isn't all that particular about the pay. They of course want to be paid a livable wage, but they rarely look for more. This means that they rarely ask for wage increases or promotions, and they're definitely not job hopping to maximize pay. This is in stark contrast to the private industry, which has very much trended in the opposite direction. Employee loyalty is at all-time lows, and the days of people spending 40 or 50 years at the same company are long gone. The same, however, cannot be said about the government. It's not uncommon to see government employees who have spent decades, if not their entire careers, at the government. But while the government has employee loyalty, this simply leads to less competitive salaries. When your employees are willing to stick around regardless of whether you keep up with market wages or inflation, it's unlikely that you actually keep up with market wages and inflation. And given that most employees are complacent and comfortable, no one really does anything about it. Now, of course, there are some unions who fight for better pay, and they definitely put forth a valiant effort. But at the end of the day, they're really just fighting for peanuts. For example, this union is trying to increase the 2023 pay raise from 4.6% to 5.1%. I mean, they're literally having to fight over 0.5%. In the private industry, the tone is more like, if you're not willing to give me a $20,000 promotion, I'm gonna switch to someone who is. Something else to note is that a large number of government employees aren't even there for the pay in the first place. Virtually all government leaders are there for popularity, power, and prestige, not for a paycheck. A similar argument could be made for everyday employees as well. Many of them are simply there for the health insurance or the retirement benefits. These people usually have spouses who work in the private industry, or they themselves worked in the private industry and saved up a bunch of money before switching over. So they don't actually have to worry all that much about saving for retirement or maximizing their pay. All they have to do is pay their dues and cash out the benefits, and that's exactly what they're looking to do. While much of the public sector can be explained by complacency, this isn't true for everyone working at the government. Unfortunately, a non-negligible portion of the public sector is filled with people who don't exactly want to be there. This primarily consists of people that the private sector views as undesirable or unhireable. This doesn't necessarily mean that these employees are bad employees per se, but they have traits that private companies just don't want to deal with. For example, a given employee may have a long job gap on their resume. Now, this employee may have a perfectly legitimate reason for this gap. Maybe they were taking care of a sick relative, or maybe they were sick themselves. But private companies don't really care about the reason. From their perspective, this may be an indication that no one wants to hire this person. Also, it's more than likely that the person is rusty at the job. So the company would rather just move on to the next applicant than investigate further. Another popular hurdle for many applicants is a lack of networking. You would think that truly qualified candidates would have no trouble finding a job. But this is not actually the case, especially during market downturns. In fact, it's way more valuable to have an extensive professional network than just simply have the skills, given that the largest portion of hires come from employee referrals. From the company's perspective, it makes way more sense to bet on someone that a good employee is willing to vouch for, as opposed to someone that you have to judge based on a piece of paper. And finally, the last major group of people who have a difficult time finding private jobs is people with disabilities. While companies may be willing to accommodate for someone with a wheelchair or autism, it's unlikely that they'll deal with someone who is deaf or blind. Now, technically, it is illegal for employers to discriminate based on an applicant's disabilities, but if we're being real here, that's not exactly how things play out. Also, employers are allowed to discriminate if they can argue that a given disability will limit an individual from completing a job's functions. And this is not that hard of an argument to make when an applicant is deaf or blind, regardless of the job. The government, on the other hand, is magnitudes more likely to give such candidates a chance, and oftentimes they're the only ones to give such candidates a chance. So, while these people may not want to settle for lower compensation at the government, they really have no choice, and they don't have much negotiating power either. Low government salaries are nothing new. The government has always paid less than the private industry, but they usually made up for this with better work-life balance and benefits. Over the past few decades, though, the disparity between private and government jobs has simply grown larger and larger. And given the record high inflation right now, the appeal of government jobs is not nearly as clear. You can argue that the government offers greater job security during a recession, but at what cost? We're not talking about a salary difference of $50,000 at the government versus $70,000 in the private industry. We're talking more like $50K at the government versus $100K plus in the private industry. At the government, each promotion gets you an extra few $1,000s, while a promotion in the private industry usually gets you tens of thousands of dollars. When you compound this reality over an entire career, we're talking about lower compensation on the scale of millions. So if you're currently working a government job or are considering taking one, it may be time to reconsider your options, but that's just what I think. Would you take a government job? Comment that down below. Also, drop a like if you think that government employees are underpaid. And of course, consider checking out our Discord community to suggest future video ideas and consider subscribing to see more questions logically answered. But until then, I'm Hari, and I'll see you guys on the next one.